Hello, it is once again Friday. You are now watching RantboxTV, so thank you for joining us. I am John Clay, your host, and we are joined today by Rob and Shringi. How are you guys doing?
Great.
Good.
Cool. Excellent, excellent. You guys want to talk about games and representation of. I'll let it, something. Let's let you guys talk about it, because I know you've got a game that you're working on that this theme is actually quite inherent to.
Yeah, Rob, do you want to go or should I?
I'm happy to, but yeah, I'm happy to jump in, and then I'll kind of like pass it over to you.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're Shrinky and I kind of we make computer games, and we're kind of interested in looking into and looking at ideas that aren't necessarily I don't know, totally mainstream or trying to I guess find interesting little nuggets of things that people haven't necessarily explored before. And something that kind of keeps coming back when we do this are things like inclusion and diversity, which is a real shame that this should be, nuggets of things that people aren't really exploring that much.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, like when you say representation, John, I think it's more than representation. If I had to sum it, it's more about inclusivity. And I know they like sound similar, but it's a little different. Basically, as a character, you still like not necessarily, representative of any minority as such. I mean, you are a woman and stuff, but it's a lot about you have no other choice but to empathize, like as a main player. And it's a lot about, what gets lost in translations when you're talking across cultures, when you're talking across. So a lot of things that get lost in translation and what like how do I say it? Like you're basically as a character solving puzzles, but not like math problems. You're solving empathy problems, right? And you're facing challenging decisions, but unless you channel some sort of heart in it, in this it is a lot of poetry. Like unless you put that attention into, reading what the other person is saying, and it's not straightforward.
Could you give me an example of one of the puzzles? Because it sounds quite in-depth and interesting.
So like, you as a character are going to a place called Lemut. It's a place which is fantastical, like you don't know. And you're on a kind of a mission from your homeland, which is Earth, in this case, quite a Western place, that you need to go and make the happiness quotient higher or make the quality of life higher of people in Lemut. And then you have these certain tasks that in 31 days, you have to deplete these resources, you have to get the quality of life to at least 50 or some arbitrary number. And your main aim is to deplete the resources, finish this in 31 days and come back. And then you'll have a report that, oh, this person went there and they made the life better of these Lemutians. Now Red lands on Lemut and she realizes that the quality of life is quite high, right? Like it's not really much farther, or in fact, it's at the same level or higher than what she's been sent on. And so now her main objective is to finish all the resources so that they can be this newspaper article of how this company has made Lemut better by giving them, these needy people what they need. And I think this was inspired by, Rob had come across this Action Aid project that people were doing in India and Africa and such. And like people who go from here are not really understanding the problem, but it still becomes like a nice documentary and stuff like that. And that's where the inspiration came from. So when she goes to Lemut, she realizes that the Lemutians, the way they talk, is still speaking English, but the way they speak is quite different. And what they need might not be what we need. So a Lemutian will, for example, say, oh, so dry my throat. And then you have different options of what you could give this person. But then so you'll slowly learn how they speak, and you'll slowly learn what is it that is satisfying. But also within Lemut, people are different. So if one person is saying, oh, so dry my throat, and maybe they need tea, that doesn't mean that when the next person says the same thing, That's what they want. And we're trying to really simulate the reality of the situation, that if you actually go to India, there's like a lot of different people and you're trying to solve a problem. You might solve it for, a small section, and you might not solve it for the big section. And throughout, Red has this overarching goal from her back home, that she needs to come back and finish the resources. So she's supposed to make decisions based on whether she wants to know these people more, or she wants to just finish her task. And am I missing something, Rob?
No. Like,
are you still there?
I think you're getting a lot of kind of great key points in this. I think like one of the main things that we wanted to kind of get across with this, as Shringi was saying, is that there's like, just because something is different doesn't mean that it's worse. But I think as people, we often have like a tendency to kind of believe ourselves superior or inferior in some way, and I think that there's certain sort of kind of cultural things that kind of back this up. And so by looking at this character being sent almost on, it's almost like a missionary or some sort of kind of like aid mission to go and help people, but the fact that these people actually, they're not necessarily less off, they're just different, but there's kind of an arrogance of like, oh, we need to help these people, but actually maybe there's kind of like, there's more to learn by just a sort of equal exchange.
Yeah, that sounds quite interesting, because I mean, there has been, and for a very long time, specifically, if we think of like, say, Live Aid, there was this idea about, for want of a better way of putting it, the white savior that would go in and transform a certain area that needed our help. But it seemed to be a very one-way dialect, in that we weren't really understanding what we could gain from that place as well. Obviously not just from any resources that might be there, but in terms of our actual communication and culture. Have you thought about that aspect at all?
I mean, one of the main things that, like, one of the reference points was, I mean, it's not exactly what you're saying, but one of the reference points was this movie, which is about women in India, and I think even Africa, but the one that I saw was women in India not having like sanitary napkins, etc. during periods. And so ActionAid and some other companies wanted to go and help. And there's this whole documentary of almost looking down on people and saying, oh, they don't have this. And this documentary won the Oscar, by the way. And I think it's a great initiative as well. I don't think it's a bad initiative, but there's a lot of, scenes of girls being embarrassed and saying, oh, even when we talk about periods, they're embarrassed, but they're not understanding the culture that with a movie camera, if you go to village people anyways, they will be embarrassed. Like, that kind of nuance is completely missing. There is like, over here, there's an agenda that we have to go help them and we'll fix that problem by providing them X resources. And in that sense, it becomes very money-minded in a way. That, okay, this is poor, let's give poor people the thing they need and they'll be better off. But we're not spending the time to contextualize the problem and understand that even if they had the money, they end up spending on something else. Why? And how are they actually dealing with it right now? And actually talk to them and understand what would really help. Will it really help to put a camera in your face and show that, oh, you're so regressive? Or will it help to, understand and the language of that? And I think this one dialect that you're talking about, it's very goal oriented, which can be good. It's not always bad, honestly. But in that sense, if we zoom out and look at it, it feeds into this whole hierarchical idea of East and West. And I think that is where I feel that when you zoom out of that situation, where you may or may not have help, you're basically now writing research papers, winning Oscars about it. And the whole thing is now become that you've used this resource of helping somebody to up your own, position in the hierarchy. And I think that is where Rob and I have been discussing that how can you help without, becoming involved in the rat race of it. like coming to a point where we come to equality. That's what we're after, right? Coming to a point of equality and helping each other rather than it being a one-way traffic. What could you have learned from those village people? How are they living sustainably? What kind of practices are they using? Because there's better community building or something. There must be something that they have to offer as well.
Yeah.
How do we have that exchange rather than having this, downflow of things? I think that's one of the ways we are looking at this problem.
Yeah, and I think also it's like it's also kind of being tackled through the game mechanics of the game, because most games have got kind of quite strict objectives, and there's goals and there's scores and there's points and there's kind of skill and things like that, rather than focusing maybe on things that are a bit more amorphous, like the feeling of a game, or kind of the general aesthetic being what's important. Games that are like that are often kind of in some respects talked down on by sort of certain portions of the gaming community. But for this, we're almost kind of playing on that, where there are scores, there are things to do, there are objectives, but it's not necessarily what's important. It's like there's other layers to it, where actually there's maybe one experience where you just go in and you're kind of like, I'm going to win this, but actually that's not necessarily the only way to kind of approach this sort of situation. And maybe there's something to be gained from approaching it differently. And another thing I wanted to kind of like touch on as well, back to what we were saying about kind of representation in games. Something that we've kind of tried to sort of focus on is sort of looking at differentness rather than specifics. So Lemut, the fictional planet where this takes place on, is very intentionally fictional. It may be based on things or may not be, but it's fictional. And Red, the main character, is coming to this place and seeing the differences. And I think rather than trying to go, okay, we're going to put a person that looks like this in a game, or a person that looks like that in a game, it's rather looking at, well, why do people see each other as different? And how can people get this feeling of possibly alienation, possibly a feeling of not necessarily fitting in, but feeling like, well, maybe you should, or feeling like where you come from isn't necessarily valued or is valued differently. And then so kind of just playing with all these sort of themes, rather than going, okay, we're going to specifically we want to make a game that has something that looks more like this or that.
Yeah,
that sounds so healthy, especially when we think of the fact that in our situation of lockdown, which by the time this video comes out, hopefully you'll be out of lockdown, we've been given a chance, or afforded the ability to question the stories that we tell ourselves. Yes, who we are, what we aim to do in a day, where we intend to go. And in this time of lockdown, in between asking those big questions, arguably one can switch oneself off and play a Star Wars game or a Street Fighter game, which Rob knows that we've been doing quite a lot. But there's something to be said about what you guys are planning to do, in that the merit is that, as you said, it's not just goal orientated, it's contemplation specific. And so therefore, hopefully, I'm hoping this sounds amazing, but once you finish playing the game, you'll still have those ideas going on and take them into the real world. Is that part of your logic?
I would say so. So for example, you could play the game like a most oblivious person. Like you go like, okay, I have to reach this goal, this quality of life. I don't care what emotions are thinking. And actually it will be quite like real life, that you've been oblivious. Your game will actually be much shorter than the whole depth of the game. And you will come out as a star. You'll be like, oh, Red finished the mission but you've not actually played the game at all. You've only scratched the surface of it, right? And there will be undertones that you've missed something, but on the very surface of it, you would have finished it. And for such a person, there won't be a lot of contemplation. But like, if what we are expecting, and my faith in humanity is that you'll at least try a bit, right? And for those people who at least try a bit, I think there'll be a lot to think about, like what decisions you make, how much are you trying to understand, how much I really want, like one of the things that we really want is to make it clear that how much effort that it actually takes. It is not a trivial thing to understand somebody, right? And throughout this game, it's not going to be like, you can go like, I don't want to play this. This is too hard. And that is also making a point. Like that is part of it. That if you go on this journey of trying to understand, it's not about, the normal game balancing that's going to be easy, then hard. It's actually very much a process. Like you'll be like, oh, I get it. But then you'll be like, I thought I got it, you know? And then you learn more about Lemur. The more you engage, you learn more about it. So there's a journal feature which will tell about their customs and cultures. And the more you study that, when you come back to the puzzle solving, the better equipped you will be. But it will never be like, you fully get it. And actually, if you really play the game well, the end is not going to be as rewarding as when you played it badly. It will be at a place where you're like, oh, there is so much more to unpack. Let's play again, or what it's trying to say. And this is where the embodiment part of games really comes in. So some of the literature in games talks about a game really allows you to be in a scenario, right? So we see movies, we see literature, and they're very powerful. And obviously, like for me, I feel a lot of empathy towards with movies and literature as well. But studies show that a game really allows you to enter this place. And sometimes when we're doing representation through games, we think that adding a person of color is going to add representation, but that's very representation in terms of stats is important. There's no question about it. But do you really enter the game in the different skill and really feel it? It is very superficial to just have a different skin color. And here what we're saying is you might just be a white girl. Red is a white girl. But what we're saying is that you'll feel like a minority in Lemur. You'll feel like the person who's trying to understand. And I think that is what we're aiming, not just with Red, actually with a set of games that Rob and I have been thinking. Like Red is our first one, but always when we talk about it, a lot of our games revolve around the mind of a person and the kind of things that they're thinking. Like one of the games we're talking about, like Rob recently had an idea, so I'll leave it to him. But another game that we're talking about is like a mother's head and all of the things that are going around. And it's almost like a warehouse. So you have to like put the things in the front row if you want to do it, right? So you have to keep organizing the warehouse. But depending on where you're from and what kind of things on your head, the warehouse kind of changes. Like for me, one of the things always in my head is my visa. So I'll always have a spot in the warehouse, right? And so you'll have little quests coming in. Like for example, something as simple as go to a party. But if you had put your dress and all the things of prioritizing yourself at the back of the warehouse, then you won't be able to bring it to the front while that thing will be over. So you'll always would have prioritized your kids or chores and stuff. But the whole point is that how do you work through this warehouse that you make the most of the things that are opportunities coming your way. And again, this is not so much about who the mother is. It could be a man, for example. It's like currently in our head, it's a mother, but it could be anybody. It's not so much about who they are, but it's about based on who you are, what kind of things that you have to think. Like for example, Rob doesn't have to think about a visa. I have to. And also Abhishek has to. So it's not so much about gender over there. It's just about being in a different country. And those kind of things. And Rob had a really cool idea very recently, which I've fallen in love with.
Rob, do you want to tell us what the idea is?
I will tell you what the idea is.
Excellent.
No, we were talking yesterday about, or the day before, just about communication and about how people are kind of treated, depending on who they are and what the situation is, and specifically we were kind of talking about people that are, I don't know what the right word is, but kind of pushy. you know, and people that are sort of bolshy and kind of come in and like, I know, you know, and let me tell you, and thinking certainly, I don't know, a lot of the time in my experience, most of the people that I kind of know that are sort of white men. I mean, you know, I'm just thinking about the fact that I wonder if that isn't something to do with the fact that that behavior has been reinforced. It has worked for them, versus someone else where maybe it you know, they've been shut down when they've been like that. And so we wanted to play with this. So how could you have some sort of game, like, you know, we don't know what sort of format or anything yet, but where you get to try and do this, or do the opposite, and you see how the system reinforces the behavior in you, but you don't necessarily know who you are. So maybe you know, you kind of pick a character at the beginning, but that's not necessarily who your character is. And so you're trying to, you know, you're trying to go through the world with certain ideas in your head, and the world is responding to you. And I think this is one of the things that's really interesting about games, over maybe film or books or anything like that, because it's interactive. Half the interest or the excitement or whatever is the fact that you're able to probe systems. So you can go, you know, and you know, you can probe narratives as well, I guess. Here's a system, here's a narrative. See what happens. What happens when I try and do this? What happens when I try and do that? And like, where are there maybe opportunities within this to, you know, bring out interesting ideas or explore interesting ideas?
Sure. I have 3 questions for you before we wrap up. One, is there a precedence for the kind of game that you guys are creating that you've looked at so that you understand a little bit more about where you're going?
So it's been very, very difficult in that sense, because I think the kind of games, I won't say that either me and Rob know all games to ever exist, right? Like, we know the popular games. And if we look at this kind of games which are touching on systemic issues, I think Papers, Please comes to mind, and there are some other games. But honestly, this whole idea of coming at it from a point of empathy and a point of, you know, some certain kind of poetry to it and that kind of stuff, we don't, at least I don't know, but that could be totally my ignorance. So so we're coming from a blank slate mostly.
Okay, that's interesting.
I mean,
Rob?
our inspiration point was that Action 8 thing that happened, right? Like,
Yeah.
so it wasn't a game, it was the issue.
Okay. My last 2 questions are specific to each of you. Rob, could you tell me more about the planet? What's it called? Lemort, yeah?
Lemut.
Lemut. Is there any specific element of its history that you, when you created it, you learned something about yourself? I'm fascinated with the idea that when artists create something, after a while, when they really look at the artifacts, they can figure something out about themselves that maybe they weren't conscious of before.
Right. Interesting question. I think Shringi is probably slightly better equipped to answer the question because she's the designer of the team. So,
okay.
Yeah, if I don't know if you've got an answer, and then I'll take your question.
Maybe it'll be interesting if I tell what Lemut is and how it has affected you. So there are a few things about Lemut. One is Lemut is primarily all women. Like, it is, Lemut is a planet of only women, and we don't know why we don't see men. We don't know whether the men are dead or they don't exist, but all of the people that you meet in Lemut are very much women. And all of the people at Lemut, they have this innate need for community and communication. Like, they've prioritized that over anything else, and they spend a lot of time with each other, talking and discussing things and creating art on walls and stuff. And women are empowered, but not in terms of them even knowing that they're empowered. Right? They are existing as fully functional people who are independent in their own senses, whether it's in terms of food, whether in terms of religion, whether in they're just being themselves. But we don't see men except one person who we are calling the leader. And this person is actually in my head, this person is a transgender person, and we see them from behind. So we don't really know whether they're a transgender person or not. It depends on the player. In my head, when I've created it, it's a transgender person. But really, only I know that, I suppose. But how does that like affect Rob? I don't know.
Well, let's find out.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I find it kind of a little bit confusing because I didn't grow up on Limud, so it would kind of seem alien to me. I guess I'm excited to kind of explore Limud a bit and find out whether I can fit in.
Okay.
So, yeah.
My main question that I was going to ask you, Shringi, was, maybe I'm wrong, but has your poetry been an integral part of creating this game? And if so, how?
I think, Rob, you can't take this one, can you?
Oh, watch me try.
It definitely has been. So one of the things about poetry that I have witnessed and also struggled with is that there is a certain movement in poetry, right? When we're looking at ethnic writers, we want them to tell about brown girl challenges. I'm not saying that is not important, but we have stereotyped what kind of poetry can be written by people who look like me. And that kind of poetry gets publicity and stuff. But the kind of poetry I'm writing is pretty colorless, I would say. And it's not conscious that I don't want to write about that. I think it comes in my poetry anyways, but it's not centered towards that. So I see a lot of ethnic poetry around words like holy, henna, the words which are already like turmeric, coconut oil, things which are like between east and west, and west is already kind of acknowledging it. Whereas me and some of the fellow writers I know who look like me, we're not trying to cater to that kind of, we're not trying to cater to any audience. We're just trying to write what we write. And what we realize is that that kind of poetry, which needs more effort from a Western audience, is immediately rejected because it's beyond that, beyond the words that is already been exposed, beyond the ethnic diversity, right? It's more. And when it's more, they're going back to what from their own poets, whether it's in the past, but people like us, we're not getting it. And over and over I've said that if you care about inclusivity, it's not about you appreciate our poetry and stuff. It's about giving it a shot, also saying things differently. And that's the important bit. Like, we're
Sorry,
not
could
like,
you repeat that last bit because it froze then? You said it's not about giving it a shot, or?
Yeah, it's not, give us a shot and make us as important as the white writers. What I'm trying to say is that when we're talking about inclusivity, what people of color bring is, it's not that we're just talking about different things. It's not just that we're talking about different topics, but we're also saying things differently. The way we use language is different. The way we approach a problem is different because we're culturally different. And I think that is the level that takes hard work. If you read my poetry, it'll take you a bit more time because we're not using the same language pattern, even if it's English. We're not using the same metaphors. And that is where I think Red's poetry has a lot of influence. Because what I'm saying is that you'll really have to pay that attention to understand what's happening. Because the language pattern itself is changed, even if it's English. And in Red, it is much smaller. Like my poetry is kind of longer and quite, in that sense, it can be harder. But Red has kind of like shorter sentences, but it still has that, I'm not going to be easy for you. I'm not going to use words like henna and turmeric and coconut oil. That's not what I'm doing. I'm just saying things, what I have to say. And we share this common language, but this language is no more yours. Like English does not belong to you. We share this language and we speak it differently. So I hope that answers your question.
Very much so. I feel quite saddened that we've actually run out of time. So I can't really ask you more questions, but I'm hoping that you guys will at some point want to come back and we can do some more investigation of this topic, because there's so much more to go into. As you know, and I'm hoping that the viewers know, we're very subject driven. So I haven't even told people essentially that much about you. I always save that into the end. So very quickly, Rob, what do you do when you're not talking to me and RantboxTV?
I'm a computer programmer, so I make stuff, and I sort of specialize in working with games technology. I'm also supposedly kind of in the process of doing a PhD at Goldsmiths. So
very succinct. Thank you, Rob. And Shringi, what do you do when you're not talking to me?
I'm a game designer. Or used to be more of a game developer, but mostly a designer. And I'm a game researcher. Recently finished my PhD, and I'm a writer. I write poetry and short stories, and I am teaching game design at University of East London.
Fantastic. This has been amazing. I really do hope you can come back, because there's just way too many questions. If people are interested in what these people are about, then there should be links in the description box to a project or video of their choice, which I'll find out from them later as to what that's going to be. I was John Clay. RantboxTV is online every Friday before 12:30 p.m. GMT. This has been great, and I'm going to go now because it's been too much fun and I'm knackered. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks for having us.
Bye-bye.